welcome back to another edition of the 5-Star Podcast of Wrestling. I'm your host, Sean Meyers, joined by my trusty co-host, Justin Lowery, via Skype. Justin, how's everything going for you?
Super.
That's what I like to hear. Positive attitude heading into another week of the Raw recap. We are going to talk about Monday Night Raw and some of the notable things that happened on the flagship show of WWE. It's still called that. I don't know if you really would consider it that if you're really breaking down the performance of Raw in recent weeks. It's come up short many times, and I think there were some positives to this show. I thought that for the first time in a long time, Justin, they made Brock Lesnar seem sort of interesting and not just a guy who stood there next to Paul Heyman and let Paul Heyman do all the work. If nothing else, that's probably going to be my biggest takeaway, is that they actually have a pretty interesting storyline with Brock Lesnar developing, aside from the fact that he's still going against Roman Reigns for the umpteenth time.
I guess it finally takes, Brock to actually be leaving for them to actually come up with something interesting. I guess my take on him and the Paul Heyman thing, I guess it's one of two ways. One, they're both in on it, and it's supposed to, give Roman a false sense of security. Or two, Brock's leaving. They still want to keep Paul Heyman around for something else, so they'll split them up and explain why he's on, TV without Lesnar. I'm guessing. But yeah, it was interesting. It seemed like the crowd was kind of more into Roman than usual, which may be a good sign for Vince and company. I do think them being in Miami had something to do with that reaction, though. So we'll just have to wait and see next week.
See, I'm almost thinking the opposite, where the crowd in that scenario rallying behind Roman a little bit. And I will say, I do think legitimately some people were saying we want Strowman, and it sounds like Roman. But I think the majority probably were saying Roman, but you kind of get both. It's interesting because they sound so similar. But my concern is Vince McMahon, seeing that, is going to think now that it's working. Well, the problem is once you get to SummerSlam and you get to New York, you're not going to get that reaction. And Lesnar might not be popular, but Roman's not going to all of a sudden become popular. They've tried this before. It's just not going to work. Maybe here and there in certain cities, in certain scenarios, it does once in a blue moon, but it's not something they should consistently expect or bank on, because they'll just be disappointed again when the reaction isn't there in the second biggest pay-per-view of the year.
I don't think Vince and his people care that he gets booed. I really don't think they do. I guess they care to a bit because they're trying to get people to cheer him, but it hasn't changed his direction or his mindset. He doesn't care. It's going to be his way, and that's it. He doesn't listen to the people. It's his way or no way. We'll see. Do I think it's going to last? I don't think so. Especially in that New York, New Jersey crowd for SummerSlam, that's not, it's not going to work. I do think Roman's going to win in SummerSlam. I did see today that it's being reported Brock has 3 appearances left with the company. The Raw before SummerSlam, SummerSlam, and the Raw after. And the reason that drew my interest is the Raw after. I guess 2 options. He can lose at SummerSlam to Roman, come to Raw, and he, leaves a baby, or, he tells his crowd, I'm done, I quit, kind of like a Batista type of thing, and he leaves to never be seen again, maybe. Or he actually beats Roman again in a surprise move. He says he's leaving the company with the belt, and all of a sudden Braun Strowman comes, cashes in, and you have, your cash-in moment.
Any scenario that he stays beyond that in your mind?
No. Well, no. Not
See, I would have thought that after WrestleMania, but for better or worse, he stuck around.
Right, but now he's fighting in the UFC in November. Even if he wants to come back, he's going to have to take a couple months off to train for that. And, granted, we've seen him not appear for months on end with the title, but I think this time, legitimately, since he's actually fighting in the UFC, that he is going to drop the belt.
Let's focus a little bit more on exactly what happened with Brock and Paul Heyman on Monday night, because I think it's worth sort of detailing. Early in the show, Brock Lesnar was shown making his appearance, per se, in Miami, but just sitting backstage, and it was sort of, truthfully humorous. He was reading various magazines, completely disinterested in Raw, which is going along with the storyline they've been building, that he doesn't care about the company, doesn't care about the fans. Kurt Angle wanted Brock Lesnar out of the ring. Paul Heyman says that's not in the cards. Kurt Angle then threatens to fire Paul Heyman if Brock Lesnar does not come out, and they use some sort of weird explanation about how Heyman's under contract to Kurt Angle, so on and so forth. What this led to is Heyman pleading with Lesnar, Lesnar saying, I do what I want, I don't care about you. Ultimately, he came out to temporarily save Paul Heyman's job as he was just about to be fired. But then Brock sort of turned on Heyman and didn't go full on with an attack, but kind of showed him who's boss and gave him a physical warning not to do that again. So now this becomes more than just Brock Lesnar and Roman Reigns. You have the Paul Heyman angle. Your point, Justin, I got the same feeling that it seems like Heyman and Lesnar are working together and that they're going to turn this on Roman, but how can you realistically do that if Lesnar's not going to be sticking around? It seems like a waste if you're not going to have him going forward.
Well, right, and that's. I mean, honestly, I couldn't understand it. It would make no sense, especially if Paul Heyman leaves television with Brock Lesnar, unless they want to keep him around for some type of other angle or manage somebody else. I mean, they tried that with other guys.
Cesaro.
And oh God, Mr. Perfect son. Why can't Curtis Axel?
Well, he's half of the tag team champs, Justin. He's obviously had a successful career thanks to Paul Heyman.
Just drop that pretty quickly. So I guess they're not going to use him for anybody else. You know what would be awesome, which it's never going to happen, is Paul turns on Brock and sides with Roman. My God.
In that scenario, do you have Roman as a heel then?
Yes. And then, that would be insanely crazy. That would get people talking, the crowd, and the crowd wouldn't even know what to do. I think you would have one of those moments where people's faces literally drop in the crowd, but that's why they'll never do it, because it would be too good.
Let's move on a little bit here with Monday Night Raw. So we talk about the Lesnar-Heyman interaction, and that closed out the show. Roman Reigns was already escorted out of the building to avoid any conflict, so on and so forth. So it really came down to Kurt Angle, who was attacked by Lesnar and Heyman for the finish, and to a lesser extent Baron Corbin, who decided to get out of Dodge. But another notable happening on Raw is the IC title storyline and how it seemingly continues to evolve with Seth Rollins, Dolph Ziggler, and it seems like very much in the mix Drew McIntyre, because Rollins and McIntyre had another match, another very good match, interrupted ultimately by Dolph Ziggler. It turned out to be a DQ finish. But it just seems like McIntyre is destined to work his way into this match at SummerSlam. I thought maybe a couple weeks ago that Finn Balor also would be in that scenario. It doesn't look like Finn's going to be in there now, at least not based on what he did this past week. But are we getting closer and closer to maybe having a triple threat where teammates Ziggler and McIntyre sort of potentially have to go against one another, because they haven't really shown any signs of dissension? But why do you keep using Drew McIntyre in these high-profile matches if he's not going to do anything at SummerSlam?
Yeah, I think that's totally what we're seeing. Within the next couple of weeks, it will be announced that McIntyre is entered in the match, which Ziggler, I think it's going to come off that he's not happy with it. I guess you could say, like, oh, this is great. Me and you could just, team up against him. I win. This is great. And then it's McIntyre, I think, is going to end up walking out of SummerSlam with the title. That's how I think it's going to end. He's going to be added to the match and actually end up winning the match. And then you'll see a feud between him and Ziggler. That's what I think is going to happen. And then Seth Rollins will move on to something else.
Do you see a scenario, Justin, where this leads to a breakup between Ziggler and McIntyre, in which maybe McIntyre becomes a face? Because I think a lot of people liked him in NXT in that role. I think he's pretty good as a heel, but there's been talk that maybe he's a guy that becomes a face and becomes a big-time star, and that he's bigger than Ziggler. This was sort of just a way to introduce him, and I think it's been an effective way. But ultimately, if those guys split, one of them's probably going to have to turn on the other one, and it seems like Ziggler's maybe a little bit more natural to be the heel going forward if that's the case. Although you never know. I mean, the comparisons between Michaels and Diesel have been made, and that's sort of how it worked out with Diesel becoming the face in that scenario. Do you expect history, in a sense, to repeat itself here with these two in 2018?
I do, And one factor that we do not know that we haven't discussed here is Ziggler's contract. There was reports that he, re-upped, and then Ziggler came out and said no, he didn't. So there's been conflicting reports. No one really knows when his contract ends. Did he, re-sign? If he didn't re-sign and he is leaving, this could be his end of the line for him. He drops the belt. Maybe he does have a feud with Drew McIntyre, and then he goes off and does something else. Or if he did re-sign, then just long line of Ziggler, feuds that we'll forget in 5 years.
It's funny you mentioned maybe some uncertainty with his contract. I feel like the same thing's happening with Daniel Bryan, because there's been reports that he's re-signed, but it doesn't look like that's official at this point. So I don't know if the company's really doing a good job being tight-lipped about this stuff, or maybe there's just a lot of premature rumors flying around.
If he re-signed, wouldn't you say that, unless you want to give? I mean, it's not like it's a career, versus career match where you're like, or something like say that he re-signed. Like that's something I think you would want to put out there. I mean, no one really knows. I mean, I guess we won't know until after SummerSlam. I would assume if The Miz wins at SummerSlam, maybe that means he is leaving, because why would they put over Daniel Bryan on his way out the door when his contract's supposed to supposedly end September 1st or within the first 2 weeks of September?
If you're Vince McMahon or the people making decisions in WWE, and you have a star, whether it be a Ziggler or Daniel Bryan or whomever, that is maybe a month or two away from their contract expiring, how would you personally go about booking that?
If I was the promoter, the owner, whatever, you have to protect your company. Rather, you're a Bryan fan or not a Bryan fan. I think by now you know if Bryan's signing or not. At this point, especially in the wrestling business, you have to know if somebody's re-signing. If Bryan's told you no, or there's something that you guys can agree upon, then it is what it is. I mean, you don't want, especially today's where there seem to be signing talent left and right, specifically to keep away from up-and-coming companies, because they see that the indie scene's kind of growing, New Japan's getting a following, and they're trying to scoop up all the talent, even if they don't want to use it. They just want to have it. So I don't think they want Bryan to go leave the company at a very high point. If anything, they'll try to, quote-unquote, bury him on the way out the door. That's why I think maybe depending on how the outcome at SummerSlam goes, we know if he signed a new contract or not.
See, now, when I think of the way you were describing that, I think of the Monday Night Wars, where a guy could jump ship and within, 24 hours be on the opposite program, so that you did not want him being in real high-profile stuff because that's instant publicity for the competition. In this scenario, usually, most guys, there's a bit of a waiting period, right? Now, I'm not sure if that applies to if their contract expires or if that's simply if they're let go.
And then, we all know if you normally future endeavor are fired, you have that 90-day but I think they pay. Don't you have to pay that person for the next 3 months?
Yeah, I believe. I don't know if that's the case when they're true free agents or not.
Right. How can you say, hey, you're fired, but you can't work for 90 days? So that you can't. So I think when your contract expires, right, like you're done. There's no ties, and there is a very big wrestling event in very early September that if his contract does expire on the 1st, he could technically show up to if there's no 90-day no complete clause.
Right.
So that it's very interesting.
Well, I know we're talking Daniel Bryan from the Raw perspective. Again, we could bring it back to Dolph Ziggler, but to me, I want to get every penny I can get out of those performers if they're going to be leaving before they leave. And I think more so Daniel Bryan than Dolph Ziggler, but I want those guys being in the biggest matches possible and working up until basically the day their contract expires. Yes, they ultimately probably lose, but you don't really hold anything back because in today's age, those people are going to get huge reactions whether they were featured their last month on TV or whether they're on the sidelines once they debut somewhere else. So to me, I get every single penny out of them. And I hope that both Ziggler and Daniel Bryan, if they leave, which I would say it's very good odds at least one, if not both of them, stay, they are used well instead of staying in a holding pattern for the next month or so.
Oh, yeah, and I think that's what they're doing with Bryan. I mean, clearly he's in a SummerSlam match. It's going to be one of the top matches on the card. with a feud that kind of started over a year ago, accidentally in a way, not even on purpose, that people have been wanting to see, for the last, year and a half, and especially since Bryan's been cleared to wrestle again. And I do agree with you. I do expect both of those guys to re-sign. I don't think Bryan's going anywhere, especially with Brie Bella being signed and Total Bellas and all that. He's still going to be featured on WWE programming.
Let's jump back into Monday night and the focus on the Raw recap. Elias, a week after releasing his album, which again was tremendous in terms of its success, he had the documentary After Raw this past Monday. That's hilarious. If you don't have the opportunity yet to check it out, definitely do so in the future. But he had a pretty prominent role on Monday Night Raw as well, and it sort of picked up on something that formed the prior week, in which Bobby Lashley was one of the many people that interrupted him. Well, Elias decided to call out Lashley this past Monday, and it turned out to be a segment similar to what we've seen with Bobby Lashley a few times now since he returned, in which it just does not showcase his strengths and it exposes his weaknesses. He is not a very good singer. Elias came out, said, "Bobby, I know you're out here because you want to sing with Elias." Elias started playing, Rockin' Robin, I believe. And then ultimately, Bobby Lashley, truthfully, it really comes down to his performance. I mean, this is something where if the guys have the talent, they can make this type of thing work. Bobby Lashley completely ruined it because he just forgot the words. He was terrible. So this is something that, truthfully, I mean, if he goes out there and does a really good job, the fans are going to give it up to him. We've seen this before with, people unexpectedly in dance-offs or stupid segments, but they get the crowd behind them by putting on a better-than-expected performance. Well, Lashley, he was bad. There's nothing more you can say. It ruined the segment. I don't think it's going to matter. These guys are still going to go forward and probably have a match at SummerSlam, you'd figure, which is good for Elias. And for Lashley, it seems like kind of a big step down after almost being the guy to challenge Brock Lesnar. But your thoughts on how this unfolded on Monday, Justin? Because good intentions, I'm sure, but the execution did not come through.
Yeah, I'm sure you saw in the video there me laughing as you were talking, because I just replayed the whole segment in my head, and I was laughing at Bob, as Roman likes to call him, which that also makes me laugh. Bob, I'm just going to keep calling him Bob because that makes me, laugh. But yeah, can he wrestle? Yes. Does he put on good matches? Yeah. Can he do anything else? No. I mean, that was awful, and I'm sure he rehearsed it, practiced it. I would think he did. And then he goes out there and just lays an egg. Totally, completely forgot the words.
Do you know the words to that song?
I know the chorus. I'm sure if I heard it, I might be able to do, I would be better than him. I wouldn't be perfect, but if you told me, hey, later today I need to go out there and sing, a 30-second clip, I can probably do it. And he's professional. He's been there, done that. That was awful.
Well, I could tell you over the weekend, he and Elias were doing something similar at house shows. Now, I believe they were doing a different song. Why the song got changed, I don't know. I know in the past, Elias has been told he can't play certain things on TV for copyright reasons and things of that nature. I believe they were doing Bob Dylan over the weekend. But the reaction I heard, I think, on Friday was that it was really good with Lashley. So maybe Rockin' Robin just wasn't his song. It's a WWE segment. I mean, we see these things a lot. It just seems like Lashley constantly is on the wrong end of these, and he's becoming basically a punchline. Are they going to be able to salvage this feud? Because they certainly weren't with Sami Zayn and Bobby Lashley just about 2 months ago.
No, not at all. And there's a good chance I see him also beating Elias at SummerSlam, right? And what does that do for Elias? People start looking at Bob as a joke, and Elias loses another match, which he loses more than he wins. And I get there's a little bit of heels lose usually more than they win, but at some point too, Elias needs to win a high-profile match. Not have a good match and lose, but he needs to win a match, especially against someone like Bobby Lashley, who's becoming a punchline, like you said, a joke to the audience. Even the casual audience is starting to laugh at him and his screw-ups. I don't think it's going to really help Elias if he loses.
You watched Lashley a little bit, at least in TNA. I did not. Tell me why he was successful there, and was he a heel primarily? Is that how he succeeded? Because Rennie Detour on the interview last week said he thought that Bobby Lashley's kind of miscast right now as the face that he's portraying.
Yeah, he went back and forth, a little bit, from the time that I saw him in Impact. But he was more of the monster. He was more of like the Brock Lesnar of TNA. He does have an MMA background. They brought that up. They talked about his MMA fights. He was more the legit badass. Here they never brought that up. They don't portray him as such. He's basically just another wrestler, maybe a step above Apollo Crews in the charisma department. Athletic, yes. Does he have an it factor to him? No. And one thing Paul Heyman and like ECW was credited for, they were able to take the positives of wrestlers and really show them and hide the negatives. Someone like Sandman couldn't wrestle a lick, but he was so over because he did other things with him to show the positives. Take Lashley,
like heavy drinking.
Right. Well, there you go. What's he good at? Okay, this. Let's show this. What's he not good at? Promos. Weird, funny segments. Don't do it. Just don't do it. It kills any momentum he might have had. And he signs back with WWE, and you wonder if he's regretting it. Probably not, because he's probably getting paid pretty decently. But, geez, are they using him poorly?
A person who had been used poorly for many, many years and really was completely out of the limelight on Monday Night Raw and in the company in general is Alicia Fox. She was injured, I believe, right before the Women's Royal Rumble in January, had just come back recently. And all of a sudden, after being completely irrelevant, a non-factor, she gets a match on Raw. She not only defeats Natalya, she then, in the most inexplicable turn of events, gets the better of Ronda Rousey. And now Ronda's having her first TV match, aside from her 2 pay-per-view performances at WrestleMania and at Money in the Bank. She's going against Alicia Fox this upcoming Monday. While it's good to see Ronda Rousey getting in a ring on Monday Night Raw and kind of setting the tone for, her preparation for SummerSlam and the title match against Alexa Bliss, where did this come from? I mean, how in the world is Alicia Fox the one that gets this spot?
Well, my original thought is, like, I think she's the longest tenured women's wrestler, correct? I mean, I think she's been there at least 10 years.
It's got to be her and Natalya, probably pretty close.
Right, which Natalya would make sense because I think she's also a better wrestler and probably safer in the ring, can really, help Ronda, but they're playing the best friend angle now. So, but when I think great wrestlers, I don't think Alicia Fox. I don't think, oh, that's somebody you want to put Ronda in the ring with because that's a good veteran woman wrestler that's going to, help her along, which I don't think Ronda really needs help. Her 2 matches have shown she's really getting it. Why her? I guess because maybe she's just a throwaway character, so they figure feed her to Ronda, real quick. It is a little strange to me because it happens all the time. You won't see her for like 6 months, and then all of a sudden she comes back doing a little crazy gimmick for a month or 2, and then she disappears again. It's weird.
Here's an issue that I have, and it goes much deeper than Alicia Fox. We saw about a month ago Sin Cara against Andrade Cien Almas on SmackDown, and obviously Sin Cara was there just to put over Almas, but does it really have much of an impact when these people aren't on TV at all? If Ty Dillinger comes out and loses to Samoa Joe, what does it mean for Joe to beat a guy that hadn't been on TV? You want to have people on, maybe not winning matches, but at least somewhat relevant. You can't have them off TV for months at a time, bring them back, and think that someone else beating them in a feud means anything. When you have a roster this big, there's going to be people that are left off every single week. That's understandable. But to me, someone like an Alicia Fox, and understandably because she was injured, but you can't have people that are irrelevant for months and months at a time and then put them in storylines that are fairly significant and think that it's going to mean anything to the fans. And this, to me, screams of that. No one is really talking about her coming back whatsoever. They made no big deal about it at all. And now she's facing Ronda Rousey. And again, how she got the better of Ronda this past Monday, and it just makes no sense to me. It's not going to help Ronda Rousey at all, I don't think. I mean, you could have probably done something else to help Ronda prior to the match. This is not the way I would have gone.
Oh no, I mean I agree. I guess they're trying to show that she's a rookie in the wrestling sense, and she's like there's still a learning curve for her. I don't know. I don't even know what to say because it does make no sense. I don't understand it. I mean, I bet you the match itself probably it's not going to be good. It's probably gimmicky. There's going to be interference. It's probably going to be something short. Bliss will interfere and there'll be something. Natalia, the whole don't even get me started on Natalia and the cat ears. I mean, I want to change the channel every time I see Natalia on my TV. Right now the whole feud is hard to sit through. That match, by the way, Natalia and Foxy was hard to sit through.
Yeah.
We all knew it was going to end with some type of shenanigans, but jeez, was that hard to sit through? It's bad TV.
Lastly, this really bugged me. Alicia Fox almost no-sold Ronda Rousey's new finishing move. I'm not exactly sure what it's called, but it's sort of like a spinning,
a little Samoan drop type of thing.
Right.
Yeah.
And then Ronda, who no-sells a lot of stuff because she's this, female Terminator of sorts, she was just brutally beaten by Alicia Fox, not really doing that much damage. I mean, I think she threw her into the barricade and hit her from behind. It just seems like selective selling, especially from the women. I remember, even going back over a year, Charlotte was in a figure four or something along those, maybe a sharpshooter, and she got out and just started smiling. It bugs me that you sell some stuff like you've been shot with a bazooka, and then other things like you didn't feel it whatsoever. And it seemed like those two women were particularly guilty on Raw. Is that anything that bugs you in 2018, or is that just what you expect?
That's what I expect. Isn't selling a lost art? I mean, they don't really sell anymore. I mean, that the psychology of matches have kind of gone out the window. Somebody hurting their knee, and a week later they're in a match, and that knee gets worked over. Every so often it happens, and then sometimes it was in Natalia's case a month or two ago. They taped the wrong knee the following week, and she. I mean, it's ridiculous. It just is what it is, especially like on the indie scene. I mean, they no sell all the time. So, I mean, it just is what it is.
It's the problem I have is how do you know what should finish the match if sometimes you sell moves and sometimes you don't? It seems almost like you can just press a randomizer. Oh, we'll sell this move but not this one.
Do you hate people kicking out of finishers? Because that happens a lot.
I think you save it for the appropriate scenarios. I have no problem with it if it's someone special that's kicking out of it, or you're trying to do a 25 or 30-minute classic match. I think doing it more than 50% of the matches on TV, yes, that's bad, because then the finishers don't mean anything.
Right. Do you agree, though, that they overdo it, though, with the kickouts on the finishers?
In WWE, I don't think they're nearly as guilty. I think that it's way worse outside. If you watch Ring of Honor, sometimes you see like a quadruple power bomb into a double frog splash and it doesn't finish the match. WWE, I don't think it's nearly as bad. And the one thing I think of is Rollins kicking out of two skull-crushing finales in the match that he had with The Miz, I believe, at Backlash. In that scenario, it makes sense because Rollins is the hottest guy in the company, and you're showing, man, this guy is so good, you just can't beat him. It made for a great match. But if you're seeing it each and every time on Raw or SmackDown, then I would say, yes, it's too much. I don't think WWE is nearly to the point of other companies in that regard.
I mean, I know this isn't Raw, but on SmackDown, Carmella kicked out of natural selection, which isn't supposed to be, Charlotte's, finishing maneuver that's not the sharpshooter, the figure eight, I should say. I mean, that was like, what's that about?
Yeah, I agree with that. The only justification I could give to that, and it's sort of bogus to make this argument, is that's your champion, and your champion probably gets a little bit more in terms of leeway with stuff like that. But, no, yeah, I agree with you. Stuff like that really figure out a way to make it an interesting match without leaning on crutches like kicking out of finishers. Save that for special moments, and then it does feel more special when you do it. Nonetheless, that's a tangent that we'll get to another time. That's pretty much my thoughts on Raw. Anything else that you really took note of on Monday?
No, another lackluster Raw. I mean, I would maybe give it a 5 overall. I mean, nothing special is happening. You're leading up to your second biggest pay-per-view of the year, and nothing special is happening. It just seems, status quo, nothing. Even Lesnar, Roman, maybe because we've seen it too many times for it to feel really special. Even the IC title picture, it's still the same stuff we've seen for the last 2 months. We're just seeing it again on a bigger stage. Finn and Corbin, same thing. It looks like they're destined to fight again.
I don't like that. I don't like that at all. I thought Finn had moved on from that, and apparently he hasn't.
I think Finn should be doing more. I mean, it's helping Corbin, out. I think it's doing good for him, but not helping Finn out. The tag team title scene is what that is.
Revival's in the picture now.
Right. I mean, everything's just kind of nothing's fresh. I mean, is there anything fresh on the Raw side coming for, SummerSlam? No, not really. Everything.
I mean, the Elias Lashley thing, I thought, well, that could be interesting, but it already seems like it's off on the wrong foot, to say the least.
Other than that, can you think of a feud going into SummerSlam that's new and fresh? No, it's all retreads. It's all like a third, fourth match already. How is that exciting? It's not.
Right. Even the Alexa Ronda Rousey, that'll be the first time they wrestle, but they've been building up that feud for a while now between those two.
Yeah.
Well, that's what this past Monday held. Hopefully things to come with SummerSlam, I think, is, less than 3 weeks away. So they'll have 3 more Raws to iron things out and hopefully get it right before we head into the SummerSlam pay-per-view. That's going to do it for the Raw recap. For Justin Lowery, this is Sean Meyers signing off. We'll be back momentarily with the SmackDown summary as we continue here on the 5-Star Podcast of Wrestling.